man and woman, let's work with those terms here. Man and woman. What are these things? That's the core question we're asking here. What is a man and what is a woman? Now, ordinarily, under the materialistic scientific paradigm, we tend to think of a man and a woman, it's just physically encoded in our DNA. A man and a woman are physical creatures that are born, they live, and they die. But that's not really what a man and a woman are in your psyche and in your mind. A man and a woman, these are abstract categories. You never see a man or a woman or men or women out in the world. You see specific entities, specific living creatures, you might say, although those two are abstract categories. You don't even see any living creatures per se. You see a specific thing. And even, thing is an abstract category too. So this gets very tricky because our language and the way that we think about reality, it all gets entangled very deeply here. So let's start untangling some of this stuff. So basically, even though you think in your mind that a man and a woman, that these are just physical things defined by genetics and by biology and by physics and chemistry and whatever you might think it is, actually, if you reflect on where your ideas of man and woman came from and what these things are, these are ideas, not physical objects. You thinking that a man and a woman are a physical thing, that itself is an idea, do you see? Physicality itself is an idea, which you are applying to this category, and then you're creating these categories. You weren't born with these categories. You picked them up from your culture. And then these categories, they're not just a simplistic thing. Like a lot of people will say, well, Leo, but it's kind of obvious that like a man has a dick and balls, and a woman has tits and a vagina, and a woman can have children, and a man can't. And this is just, it's so obvious, it's so black and white. That how could you even argue against this? It sounds like absurdity. But there's something more nuanced that's being said here. Because the way you're creating this simplistic duality between man and woman and ascribing these various features and parts to these abstract categories, you have to understand that this is not a given. This is something your mind had to invent with the help of society and culture. Because you didn't just sit down one day as a baby and decide for yourself, okay, well, I'm going to call that a man, I'm going to call this a woman. And for the man, all the characteristics of a man include a beard and, big shoulders and a big jaw and a lack of breasts and testicles and all these things. And then for a woman, she can get pregnant and she has long hair. And you didn't sit down and consciously create these categories. Where do they come from? You might say, well, they just came from nature. No, they didn't come from nature. And here is where, look, I'm not trying to teach you an ideology or a belief system that I personally have that I think is right, that I think you should adopt because I think it's true. That's not what we're doing here. What we're doing here is we're trying to actually investigate where our ideas of things came from. This is like a science that you do on yourself. A self-inquiry of a sort, where you actually ask yourself, yeah, where did my ideas of man and woman come from? Did I create them? Or was it fed to me as a child and I didn't even think very deeply about them and just accepted them? And who gets to say what is a man and a woman? Like, who gets to create that list of features? And is this list of features, is it immutable? Is it defined somewhere in the physics of the universe? Like there's a law somewhere, like imagine that God had sort of a book with all the laws of the universe written on it. E equals mc squared and a bunch of other things, 1 + 1 = 2 and so forth. And then somewhere in that book it said that a man has testicles and a woman does not. And that is that. That's sort of like the universal definition. It's not like that, though, you see. Because we ourselves are constructing these labels and these abstract categories and then assigning various properties or features to them. And so as we're doing that, you should be able to notice that it can be somewhat arbitrary and subjective and relative in how you assign things to these categories. And that could change over time, and also that different cultures could assign different features to different categories. Now you might say, but Leo, we have science. Science is an objective study of reality, and science itself says that there's a clear distinction between man and woman. These are scientific. This is not something that we invented. This is just basic science. But see, again, how deep do you want to go? Because we're going to start to go down this slippery slope you're going to start to notice very soon. Because as you bring up more and more of your defenses, I'm going to keep deconstructing them. And so what's going to start happening is that you're going to start sliding down the slope. The question is, how much slippage down the slope are you going to tolerate? At some point, it's going to start to threaten you too much. So see, you have to start to appreciate that science itself is a social construction. Where did science come from? Where did you get your ideas of what science is, and that science is even valid? Certainly not through personal experiment. You got it from society. And in fact, if you're a very rigorous scientist, you'll have to admit that science has never, ever empirically proven the existence of a man or a woman. That's not what science does. See, people have very mistaken, silly, cartoonish ideas of what science is. People assume that science has proven many more things than science has actually technically proven. Science has never proven that a man has a penis and a woman has a vagina. You might say, well, but of course science has. No, never. How could you prove that? That's not something you prove. That's like a definition you enforce. You construct that definition in order to do your science. But that's never proven. That's just assumed as a given. It's a sort of an axiom that you need in order to do anything, in a certain sense. I mean, what experiment could you run to prove that a man is supposed to have a penis? There's no such experiment. Then people say, well, Leo, but what about biology, like the chromosomes? Obviously, we know we have a rigorous technical definition of what a man and a woman is. A woman has XX chromosomes, a man has XY chromosomes, we know that. But again, that's not something that's actually literally proven by science. That's something that's, see, we're dealing with abstract categories. These abstract categories are actually a meta-scientific phenomenon. You have to create these categories in order to then do your science upon it. Technically, all science does is it does measurements. Now, you can take a human with a body and, measure his genitals or her genitals, and you could take another one and measure their genitals, and you can measure their size, their weight, their length, their type, how they look, and all this sorts of stuff. And you can even measure the DNA and make comparisons and see differences. But nowhere does it say how to categorize those things into some sort of higher abstract category like man and woman.